Hello, everybody. It's Charlie.
And it's Nicole. Oops, sorry.
And it's Nicole. Oh, my God. Jumping in.
Feeling narcissistic. No, sorry. Zip. Okay.
This is To Hell and Back, a podcast about how to take concepts and all kinds of experiences in psychology and stuff and cope with adversity in your life. But so here we go. And though most of you can't see, because I think 95% of people who hear our podcast don't view our podcast. They're on YouTube if somebody wanted to. But, now Nicole is wearing a silver hat, or I think it's silver.
It's beige, but it's a wannabe silver hat. It's a wannabe. It's not quite as cool as yours, but I thought, just for camaraderie's sake.
Thank you. I'm definitely... Now we're like twins,
Exactly. That's what I was saying. It's exactly what I thought when I saw you on camera. I was like, we're like twins.
All right. So I want to tell you about a dream of mine. I last had this dream about 50 years ago. It was a repetitive dream in childhood.
Okay.
You're wondering, what kind of podcast am I listening to? I mean, so you just have to hang in there. I just thought of this today, but I had this dream over and over again as a kid. And I was in this giant room. It was like a warehouse, and it was dark. I mean, it's giant. You couldn't even see the edges, but you knew you were in a warehouse, and you had to be careful walking around. And I'm there by myself, at least as far as I can tell. And I'm going around and thinking, how do I get out of here? In the dream. And then what I do each time I have the dream, I find a staircase and I run into a staircase, and then I start climbing up the staircase, and going up the staircase is hazardous. There's some broken stairs. There's ones that break when I step on them. There's no rails. It's like a little hazardous climbing up. And I'm thinking,
please tell me you're going to analyze this thing after.
Okay, I'm going to say something about it.
Go ahead. I want to know what the broken stairs symbolize.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you may help me with that, but I have some idea about that. And so I got it to the top. Each time I had this dream, I'd get to the top and I'd think, oh, good, I'm going to get out. And then there would be the ceiling, and it would have no way out. I'd just get to the top, and then I would wake up. And I had this as a kid many times, and it was a very troubling dream to me. I just kept thinking, I can't get out. I can't get out of here. And so I was thinking about this dream because maybe in the context of the fact that we're talking, this is our third consecutive podcast about narcissism. And narcissism, one of the things this dream tells me now, so this dream is helping me right now understand something about narcissism, which may not have been even what the dream was about. But I think the dream was about trying to get out of a very dark and lonely place. I mean, that sort of doesn't take deep interpretation to see that. And so, but one of the things, and then to climb each time, and how it is that people with narcissism are always trying to cope with the kind of maybe some kind of darkness or some kind of insecurity or shifting sands or distress. And they feel like it's not going to work. Life is not going to work out. This day is not going to work out. This job is not going to work out. This relationship's not going to work out. And then I think when that happens, then people start to try to compensate in their lives in order to cope with that feeling that the ground is shifting under you and you aren't getting what you need to feel secure. And so I think I know more about my childhood than any of you know about my childhood. And you're lucky about that. But I'll just tell you that what I remember from my childhood, and I was the middle of 5 children, and I would sit in my room. I remember this better than almost anything other than playing some sports. I'd sit in my room by myself on the bottom bunk bed, which was my bed. Yeah. And I would play our little record player. And this is the late 50s. And I would listen to Elvis Presley over and over again. And I would listen to Ricky Nelson over and over, and Paul Anka. I would listen to Frank Sinatra. I mean, I would listen to a lot of things like this and just love them. Yeah. And then I started imagining when I was about 10 that I'm probably what I really want to be in life is a singer. And that became those were the stairs. And so when you ask about interpreting these stairs and how they break. Yeah. It's kind of like when you're trying to build an edifice of a life. You're trying to get out of a dark or lonely place. I mean, you start to build something and then it breaks down, or you take a step and it doesn't work. I just think that I knew something like that in my early childhood in a dreamlike way that I think is meaningful to me. And what it tells me about narcissism now, or the link I made, while you and I have been talking, Nicole, about narcissism these last few weeks, I was thinking, what is it? I think at the core of a lot of narcissism is loneliness.
Yeah.
And so that isn't necessarily part of the model for some of the models of understanding it. But I think if you take away everything, all the edifices that people build in order to feel the grandiose, or to feel that they're worthwhile, or to feel they have value and ambitions and all of that stuff, that underneath all of that, almost like in the basement of that house, they're alone. And people are running away from loneliness and running away from insecurity that grew out of however they were raised as a young child. And I'm not saying it have to be raised a certain way. I was not beaten. I was not mistreated, especially, except by one of my older brothers, which that's another podcast. And it's sort of like, but I was coping with, and I was a reasonably functional kid, but I was coping with this thing. And then with people that I've treated in psychotherapy, a lot of times behind this kind of like endless effort to make themselves feel worthwhile and to feel valuable and to feel like something's going to work for them, there is a sense they're going to slip back into a chamber where they're all alone, and they're going to end their life alone. You know what I mean?
I can relate to that. That really resonates. And I think, part of me says, well, isn't this just the human condition? Isn't this just what it is to be, sentient being that is experiencing the world subjectively, that's never fully able to share the inner experience and have that resonate completely with anyone else. But I've also had a kind of lonely experience in childhood. There weren't kids my age where I grew up, and I was a bit of an oddity. I know that must be shocking to you now, but I was a bit of an eccentric child. I know, thank God, I managed to turn out so normally. But I think that what can I say?
We shouldn't laugh too hard at that.
I know. But I think this sense of, thinking that if I could do something really special or extraordinary, the sense of connection, the sense of belonging, the sense of, capturing unconditional love and validation. I think that was I think that's still, I think that's still present always to some extent. Although the importance of it and the desire to kind of grasp it and hold it is certainly not nearly as prevalent as it might have been when I was, a little girl dreaming about, being on Broadway or being president or God knows what else.
Yeah, you said, I was going to say in one of our other earlier podcasts, you said that you started thinking about being president when you did the Lincoln Memorial.
I did. I mean, I really, for a long time, I used to rehearse my inaugural address. It's just what I did when I was a kid. I was just like, but I think that so much of that came from this belief that, oh, well, if I really matter, then somehow I'm impervious to the pain of aloneness and rejection. So I think I really resonate with that. And I feel a lot of compassion for that part of me and for that part of all of us. Yeah.
Maybe everybody has that part. I mean, everybody is looking for something, and I think it's often looking for approval, looking for attention, looking for admiration, when in fact, love would take care of a lot of that. And so maybe shortness of love, feeling alone, feeling something didn't work out, And it, often, I mean, I've known people, and maybe you've known people where after a breakup and they've been through, they've lost what they thought was going to be their path forward. Yeah. Then they turn, after they kind of recover from that a little bit, they start turning to a different direction and they really go after something. They decide to run their first marathon. They decide to go after this or travel the world. It's like eat, pray, love. Everything falls apart, and you're off to Greece and Indonesia.
How do you know that reference? Yes,
I've heard of it. I've had my own version.
No, it's true, but that's so interesting. And it's interesting why some people are devastated and hold, whether it's hold eternal grudges or feel, mortally wounded. And then other people feel kind of woken up by, we could call it perceived rejection, or we could call it just like, disruption to expectations. But it's really interesting.
And I think when I've gone over last time, I think, and you can get this all over the place, because as you and I've talked about, there's stuff about narcissism has just mushroomed into our culture. It's just unbelievable in the last few years. If you just go on Google or go on YouTube, it's like you can just spend the next 5 years watching YouTubes about narcissism, or watching movies about narcissism and books. So there's all of this. So it's just been a huge it's a huge interest right now, and everybody's looking for something.
Yeah.
So what I want to say about the podcast right now in Narcissism is that we've been talking about things you can get elsewhere on the internet. And all over the place and in lots of books, like what is narcissism? What does narcissism have to do with the regulation of self-esteem, or as psychoanalytic types put it, the libidinal investment in the self, or things like that? What are the subtypes of narcissism? And we've been over some of those here. What are the patterns of behavior and experience that people have? And we've been over about 6 patterns last time. The grandiosity, the search for admiration all the time, constantly, the poor empathy, the dismissal and devaluation of other people, the sensitivity to feeling worthless and feeling ashamed and feeling envious of other people. All of these things are sort of patterns that grow out of what I consider this central experience where there's a certain kind of vacuum. And I'm saying that not as a theory, but as my experience when I've worked with people, that there's a vacuum in there and people are trying to build something over a vacuum. And then when one of the things they're trying to build falls apart, they fall back into that vacuum and that's why there's a close relationship between narcissism and depression. Actually, I think people then get depressed. So we've been talking about these things, which I think are all concepts about narcissism, including models of the mind to explain narcissism. Right. Forms of psychotherapy for now. But you know what we haven't talked about, and what I don't see as much when I look at the world of narcissism on the internet, is what's the actual experience of being a narcissist, being narcissistic, and what's the actual experience of being with somebody narcissistic? There's more about that, because there's all kinds
there's a lot of
self-help stuff on that.
But it actually can caricature the narcissist.
Yeah, it caricatures the narcissist.
It tends to make the narcissist, just an object of eternal blame, almost like, a vampire. You've just cover yourself in garlic and, wear the cross and make sure to stay far, far away from the evil narcissist. And that's, I think, I just imagine in the position of the narcissist, how painful that must be to be, even if you're not aware of it.
I think I think without knowing all the different ways this is true, I know that it is true, that it is a very big problem. It's been a problem about people with borderline disorders, schizophrenic disorders, any group that I've gotten very interested in. Once you start to say, well, so-and-so is a schizophrenic,
Yeah.
as if you know anything about them. And then you meet like
Right.
10 consecutive people with that diagnosis, and you say, there's 10 very different people in my office or in my life. And same with borderline, and same with antisocial even. But and it's definitely true with narcissists. As soon as one of your friends says, God, I broke up with this guy, he was a real narcissist. I mean, he was a real pig. And he was a narcissist.
I'm recovering from a narcissist.
I'm recovering. And then they'll name 5 books that you should read about recovering from the narcissist, as if the narcissist says anything. And then you meet these people, and including myself, because I have a certain strand of narcissism that grew out of me and my childhood, and that's part of how I cope with life. And so it's like you meet very different people. So I just want us to get down a little bit closer to the reality, the personal reality of who is narcissist, or what's it like, how do they come across, and how is it to be with somebody like that, and what do you do about it? That's really our agenda.
And how, I think, and how typical maybe communication responses, skillfulness might not be as effective. I mean, I think that, because I think there is, while it's really important to remember the humanity and complexity and the variety of types of narcissism, there is also something to be said for the fact that it can be very, very difficult to stay skillful and well-regulated in a dynamic with a narcissist. So I think it's like a both and.
But one thing that I think gets in the way is if let's say you've read 5 books on what the narcissist is, and then you meet one.
Well, then you're having confirmation bias.
That's right. You're not really meeting the person anymore. You're meeting the aspects of that person that fit that diagnosis, and then you're off and running, and you actually may never get to know that person. So that's I think the challenge for meeting each person where they're at. Like I've had, of the most recent people that I've met, there was one I thought is totally narcissistic. I started to treat a college student, a girl, a young woman who was a fantastic softball player, and she was a pitcher on her team. And I said to her, just like a year and a half ago, and heading into the spring, a year and a half, and I said, "What are your goals in terms of softball?" She was a junior in college. She said, "Well, next year my intention is to be the #1 pitcher in the country." And she just said that flat out. And I said,
"Yeah, I think that's just awesome." So for me, I just think that's brilliant.
I know.
I think that's like powerful, brilliant, good for her.
But what if
why shouldn't she?
No, yes. And there's all this, question is she narcissistic? So if some guy meets her, is she going to be a narcissist? But then, by the way, before we go any further, I'll just tell you. I then said, "So how are you going to become #1 in the country?" She said, "Because I'm #2 right now." I said, "How do you know you're #2? And she brought me a newspaper article. She was rated #2 in the country. Someone at USC was #1, and she was going to replace her. And how are you going to get to #1? And she tells me. So actually, I got to know her better. She wouldn't have met any of the criteria, but she sounded grandiose. Right. And then a recent person I met was kind of the opposite, because he seemed like the least narcissistic person, quote unquote, in popular terms. Anybody I knew. He was a very nice guy, very helpful to people, very good financial manager, financial advisor, and carrying everybody's financial situations around with him and taking care of all these things and being a good guy and being on every board in town. The kind of person, very involved. And turns out that he's, in a way, deeply grandiose about who he is and what kind of a saint he is. And it causes all kinds of trouble in his life. So he doesn't look like somebody narcissistic, but he would meet a lot of the criteria once you got to know him. I mean,
so interesting.
And he's still likable. He's not all that cold or anything. Anyway, I'm just...
Well, I think, that's fascinating. No, that's fascinating. I don't know. I mean, I think maybe, and we'll talk about this in a future episode, but I think there is something to be said, particularly for women, because I think that there are cultural barriers that we are working to overcome, but to set audacious goals
Yeah.
And to claim them out loud, whether they seem realistic or absurd, I think takes an enormous amount of courage and I think a little grandiosity for a population that struggles to take up space historically. I think I think a little narcissism in that way is just fine. But that's my personal,
I go with that.
That's my point of view, because being realistic maybe is not always in anyone's best interest. Who says what's realistic anyway? I mean, yes, there is a spectrum.
There's a spectrum. I mean, when I had somebody that came to the hospital when I was a hospital psychiatrist at the beginning of my career, and he was admitted for something, I forget what, and I interviewed him, and he said he was a baseball player. He was a minor league baseball player. As we got into it, in fact, it turns out it was completely not true. Just wasn't true.
Okay, so that's
that's different. And he came back a year later, admitted for similar reasons. But then when I interviewed him, he said he was a rabbi, and I thought, wait a minute.
So that's So
this is not the same as being the best softball pitcher in the country, which actually is realistic.
Correct.
So what we're going to do now, I mean, Nicole and I thought that the best way, or one way to help get into what's the experience of narcissism on both sides of the fence, you might say, is to do a role play. And a role play that's first based in a realistic situation, which is her on my relationship with each other as co-hosts. Because this podcast, by the way, this is the 91st podcast in the To Hell and Back. And so in the first,
Yay!
the first 83 or 84 or 85 of them, I'm not sure what, it was just me or me interviewing somebody, but it was just, and then Nicole, starting, I don't know how many ago, 5 or 6 podcasts ago, started to join me as the co-host. And so developing our relationship as co-hosts is not necessarily simple. I think it's worked pretty well, but I think we're still working it out. It's still a work in progress.
Yeah.
And so we thought we would role play talking about our development of our co-hosting relationship, with me playing the role of somebody who, probably based on some level of insecurity, has turned in to have a fair number of narcissistic features. And so I'm going to be portraying the person who's bringing narcissism to the conversation. And she's going to be coping with that. And we thought that would be just to do a role play that would help us explore and then discuss what happens in the role play for each of us, and whether any insights come out of it. And this is completely unrehearsed, by the way, so we have no idea what's going to happen. Okay?
Okay.
All right. So
I'm a little nervous about this.
Well, Nicole, I mean, let me just tell you, maybe you shouldn't be a co-host if you're going to be that nervous.
I understand. Charlie, look, I've said it before, and I understand that it's hard. I understand that it's hard to have me coming into your program like this, and I do really, really applaud you for being as flexible.
Well,
as
it
you
is.
can,
It is.
I will be nervous. I know I will be nervous sometimes.
Nicole, you're talking a lot, and it seems to me that I mean, one thing you should know about this podcast, if you don't understand this, is that I've been really great. People have loved this podcast. I don't know if I have 100,000 viewers. It never says that on the statistics I see, but might be hundreds of thousands of people are tuned into this. You just don't see all of it on the statistics. And there's a reason they tune in to me. I just want you to know that. Sissy, what are you getting into?
I do. I know it's because I think you're so great. And I've always been such a fan of you. You know that I'm so honored to be a part of really the next phase of what this can be. And I do understand that I can talk in ways that you're not always thrilled with. And I'm interested in hearing your feedback. And I can't just sit here silently as your co-host. I mean, I can be your sidekick, and I've said that before, but I don't know how compelling that is. And I don't know if that's really what you're wanting to do. You've got to be clear yourself.
Well, I don't know if it's what I want to do either. I don't know what exactly I want to do. I just know that, this whole thing has gone pretty well. I'm trying to remember why I bailed out of just doing it solo. But it's like I think your job is to figure out how to make me better.
Okay, and I hear that. And I respect that you are. I think that there's an opportunity for that to happen, for us to be mutually, to make each other better. And I'm getting a little defensive, Charlie. I got to be honest. I'm feeling a little bit attacked, and I'm feeling a little defensive. I don't know what to say. I feel like I've tried to contribute in a lot of ways. I've tried to contribute on the production end, and I've tried to contribute on the content end. And I'm sorry if I've disappointed you.
I haven't said you've disappointed me, but I just think you are going to have to do something about this level of insecurity, because I think what people like is to see confident people and to see people who know what they're doing. And I think, so you can learn from me, and you can follow the way, and you can find ways to help. And you said, we're here to help each other out. I'm not here to help you out. I'm here to help me out. I'm here to relate to my audience.
All right.
And I thought that it would be nice for you to be able to join in, and you might learn something from me.
That's very gracious of you. And I can't really show a lot of confidence if I can't open my mouth without you getting angry.
I didn't. Who said I'm angry at you? You can open. You're opening your mouth right now.
You said I talk too much. Well, you said I talk too much.
That's all.
And you show evident irritation when I speak.
Yeah, well, that might be true. It might be true. And I just think we have to be mindful of how we speak.
I appreciate that, and I agree. I appreciate your acknowledgement.
There's a lot of people who would like to be in your position.
I recognize that, and I'm very grateful. I really am, and I think that this has been a really. I am learning so much from you, and I think it has to be more reciprocal. And when you say that it's just me here to serve you, I don't know that I'm able to participate with you that way sustainably.
Are you threatening me? Is this a threat?
What about that?
That you can't keep participating if it's the way that I'm asking you to participate?
Well, I don't know that you were asking me. It sounded like you made a declaration, and I'm letting you know my point of view. I don't see any reason for making threats. I think we're just exchanging ideas. What is that face?
Well, I'm just trying to think about, how you can help me, how you can help this podcast, how you get, because I see other podcasts out there sometimes, and I see their production value, and it makes me feel really bad about mine. I look out there and I see these people that have these beginnings of every podcast with music and these announcements, and at the end there's announcements, and in the middle they have cool routines and stuff going on. Yes. And then I look at the number of listeners they have, and they have like hundreds of thousands of listeners, if not millions. And then I think, what's wrong with me? Why can I not do that? And then I thought, well, maybe if I have another person helping, but I just don't know how that's going to work out.
I understand, and you know that I believe in what you do, and I believe in the potential of this podcast, and I don't want to defend or make a list of suggestions. I think that there are opportunities for us to do all of those things if and when you'd like to.
Well, do you think I'm great at what I do?
I think you're great at what you do, Charlie. I do think
That's
you're great
important.
at what you do. And I'm a little bit I'm a little bit frustrated that we have to have this conversation again, because I do feel like I let you know that a lot, and this is meant to be a collaborative, reciprocal relationship.
Well, I don't know if it's too much. I mean, I kind of I'm a little ashamed of this, to tell you the truth, but I'm a little bit I kind of need somebody to tell me I'm great. I'm kind of like need to hear that, and maybe from more than one person, but at least from you. And so
I understand. You know what? No, I really respect your I really appreciate your vulnerability, and I do. I think you're wonderful, and it is a privilege, and I'm happy to reiterate that as often as necessary. And I think it's important that we have an atmosphere of mutual respect, because I can't just be a cheerleader. That's not really what I signed up for.
Oh.
But that doesn't mean I don't think you're great, because I think you're great.
I don't know. It's just this idea of mutual respect. I don't know what you're asking for. I wouldn't have you here if I didn't have respect, right?
Okay. All right. Well, you know what? Then that's all I need to hear. So I think you're great, Charlie, and I wouldn't be here if I didn't think you were great.
Okay. Well, I know it sounds like a lot, but I might have to hear that again sometime.
I am happy to tell you as often as you need. Just let me know, and I'll tell you you're amazing. And the podcast is amazing. I mean, this is amazing. This is amazing. This is amazing. Come on. I mean, it is amazing. Isn't it? And you are amazing. I am amazing. And you told me how much your listeners adore you. You are amazing. Doesn't that feel better? I feel better.
Yeah, I like hearing that. I don't know what's wrong with me, because every day I wonder it again. Every day I wonder it again. It doesn't last very long.
Well, I promise that the more present you can be with I can't promise, but there's so much to be excited about with this work. We've got so many really, really wonderful episodes planned, and I'm cheering. I'm cheering from Oslo. Here I am cheering you on.
Yeah,
and I'm happy to help you, and I want to support you and make you look great. And I wish you would cheer up.
Okay.
But you don't need to. Whatever makes you happy. You be you. You're great.
Okay. All right. Let's stop the role play. Let's stop the role play. I don't know if I could take it anymore.
Okay. I don't know if I could take it anymore. I'm like, I'll do a handstand.
But here's the thing. You think narcissism is so hard for the person that's receiving it, who's on the receiving end. It's very hard to be a narcissist. I mean, it's very hard to be narcissistic because really, I'll just make my first observation, I guess, right now, which I didn't just necessarily anticipate, is that how quickly the experience that something I'm doing is working, or that you're doing is working to make me feel better, how quickly it goes away.
Yes.
Like, it's like, as soon as you say, yes, you are great, it's like, you are great. It's sort of like Donald Trump's has people sit around and say how loyal they are to him and how much he's a genius. And then it's sort of like, but he needs it again the next day. And I realized, no wonder he feels that way. I mean, it's because you just hear from somebody, you're great, you're great. And then what happens? It's the next second.
Right.
They're not saying it.
And then there's something in the tone of voice, or there's something that they say. I felt that.
You felt that. Well, how did you feel? What do you mean?
Well, because I noticed, like, it was like there would be a little bit of a lift in your gaze or your gaze, and then if I wanted to have any kind of modicum of dignity or self-respect, and then I tried to kind of do an and or a then you would kind of like wilt. Yeah, well, you would say wilt, and then I would feel this sense of like,
you'd say, you are great, and I think we need mutual respect. And I thought, what's that mean?
There's a you're like, there's a condition. Oh, there's a condition on my greatness.
There's a condition on this. And, what it makes me think about, too, is that we didn't, in talking about the patterns of narcissism, we didn't emphasize this. But this is, I think, where the seeds of paranoia grow. For the person who's narcissistic and grandiose, who has a sort of pathological grandiosity, you might say, as soon as the crowd fades, it's sort of like, all right, where are they? What are they actually thinking? What are they going to write about me in the morning? Wow. What are they saying to each other? It's like there's so many ways that you have this seed of doubt goes into your mind, and it can become paranoid. No,
you know what it's reminding me of is I was in a relationship where my boyfriend cheated on me, or I thought he did, or I don't really remember. It was a long time ago, but I remember this thought of like, can I trust you? Can I not? And I needed that kind of reassurance in the beginning. I remember being so sensitized to the feedback and being like, wait, is it good? Is it not good? Is it good? Is it not good? Like, are you in or are you not in? And that kind of checking, constant checking, it felt like I was like, I mean, I don't know why I just thought of that, because it was ages ago, but that profound like delicacy and lack of trust in not just like myself and my okayness, but in my lovability and in the safety of the relationship, and feeling so desperately needy. Yeah. Which is just like heartbreaking to think about.
And then if the person reassures you, that again, in that situation, it goes in away 2 seconds. Really fast. So then you part ways with that person. Yeah. Thinking, did you really mean that? Or what does that mean to him?
Right. It's like, I'll never do it again. I'll never do it again. Or like, we're in this together. Like, we're all in. Yeah, except for. And I'm like, what do you mean except?
No, you just.
Like, wait, are you in this or not?
You start to have this totalistic idea of having somebody else's admiration or devotion to you. And then when.
Wow. Yeah, because it's either total commitment or not.
Yeah, because anything less than 100% could be anywhere from 95% to 0. I mean, it's
totally.
Another thing came up for me in this that I hadn't thought of. There's all these different sort of patterns that are associated with narcissism, and these are the more obvious ones, especially when they're overt, like the grandiosity, the entitlement, the being dominant, the being the pushy one, the being devaluing the other person, all of that. But there's another one, which is a tendency to have a low amount of empathy for other people. I was just thinking, I'm not sure this is the usual way that somebody ends up with low empathy, but I realized that if I was going to stop, because I considered at many moments in the role play being empathic with you, like wanting to say things like, I'm sorry I'm giving you such a hard time, or how are you holding up in this? But I didn't do that, because you realize that if you're narcissistic and you need the oncoming flow of admiration, support, idealization, whatever it is, that if you start to be empathic with the other person, you could lose it. It's sort of like it takes you off your game. You have this game, which is to keep getting the supplies coming in. And if you start being empathic to the person from whom you need supplies, they might stop. They might think that their needs are important.
So interesting, because I also experienced, there was one moment where you said something like, yeah, I get that, or yeah, if I didn't, it was like you gave me like a tiny crumb. And by that point, I was so grateful for the crumb. I'm like, thank you for that. It was like, it was so interesting. I was like, I felt like you were conceding something huge, and my need to make you happy, or like to get some sort of uplift, or like, I was more and more invested in getting this like positive affect response from you as time went on, because you were so like, it's like you were in so much pain, and then you showed some vulnerability, and then you showed, oh, I need, but I need it from you, and then I feel like, oh gosh, like I'm bad and I'm good, and I need, it was just fascinating how I started to feel guilty for like being demanding.
No, I know. I was
asking
struck by that. And I was thinking this comment you had made before, I forget if it was before the podcast started or once we started today, but about the relationship between codependency and narcissism.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, I felt like I needed buckets of support from you, of admiration and just unconditional greatness. I needed buckets from you. Yeah. You needed like a thimble from me. Yeah, like all you need is a crumb, as you put it. You need a crumb to fall off my table. I need my table to be set very well, and you need a crumb. I mean, if that doesn't define that relationship of I'm the one that's at the table, and you're waiting on the floor for a crumb, and you're so glad to get one. It's like thrilled, and so you have a sort of a reinforcement schedule for your behavior. You're willing to continue to pour buckets of adoration in as long as you get some crumbs back. I mean, have you ever heard of that?
I mean, it's so interesting. And and I can see how over time, you kind of get like, I mean, when you're up and you're happy, it must feel like such a reward for me. I must feel like, yay, everything's okay. You're good. I'm good. We're good. And I must be really willing to work really hard to kind of resuscitate that through whatever adoration, and my needs must seem more and more ridiculous comparatively, which is so bizarre. It's
so bizarre, but it goes that way, and it's a two-party system, a two-person system. I mean, it's a dance. These things don't happen by yourself. I mean, you might feel worthless,
but like, how could I? Okay, so let's look at that really quickly. So how could it have gone differently? Like, I mean, given that like we have this dynamic where I do respect you, and, I don't want to be an asshole. I mean, I'm wondering how I could have been like, all right, Charlie, yeah, you're great. Get over yourself. Let's get back to work.
That would not have worked with who I was playing. Absolutely not.
Right.
That could be a deal breaker. That could be a deal breaker. You could get fired from Trump's cabinet if you did that. And you could, so how could you have done it? I thought, I was amazed. I mean, one of my experiences, I'm not sure I would have felt this if I actually had a more profound narcissism, because I would have had more profound lack of empathy. Mm-hmm. But I kept thinking, how is she doing this? How can she do this? How can she grovel like this and put up with me? I mean, I don't think the typical person with a pathological narcissism necessarily thinks that way. But I think sometimes somebody might know that would be the appropriate thing to feel, or something like that. But there is a tension, a dialectic between these two positions, and there's not an easy way out. This is between now and next podcast, to be thinking about how to cope with being in a relationship with someone who has a lot of narcissism, and what would be skillful ways to do it. I think one would be, in the DBT world, you'd call it, you need to know when to observe your personal limits. Like when you've had too much of this kind of like devaluation, because I was not only acting like I'm grandiose and I need all of these supplies, but I was also throwing in now and then devaluing you. I mean, I think you might have noticed.
Yes. I sure did.
Like what do you have to contribute? Basically, I'm saying, I say you're lucky to be here, and
Yeah, and it's all about me. And I don't know that you have anything.
I don't know if you have anything.
Yes, I know. I was very aware.
And you weren't responding the way you might in a different situation to that, or in a real relationship. You might, I mean, you wouldn't be putting up with quite as much of that if you weren't role playing this person.
No,
right?
I'd be like,
right.
Go to hell. But it's interesting. Like, but I also noticed this sense of like, it was like, which battle is, I had the sense of like, all right, do I want to get into an argument over this, or like, any person that says this is obviously not normal, like, I don't know, like any person that's like that has self-respect, that's functioning normally, like doesn't say those things. And so it's almost like, yes, you're wonderful. It's almost like a little child. That's how I felt a little bit. It was like, when a little child is like, but mom, or like, it's broken and I want the toys. That's how it's like, you're not going to be like, listen, kid, suck it up. It's just because it's a little kid. And I kind of, there was also that. It's like, yes, Charlie.
That's
it's all about you.
Yes,
you're wonderful.
You were being that way with me, and I wasn't seeing it that way at the time. I was just, but you were taking care of my self-esteem, like you would with a child that was trying to do a hard thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting because like, I just didn't even feel worth arguing.
Yeah, so I can see now, though I didn't feel it during the role play, that what you were doing, whether you meant to think of it like this way or not, was the way I would treat a child whose self-esteem is at stake. Yeah. Like they're 4 years old and they're doing a hard thing and they're feeling bad and they're going to cry. And you say, you're doing a great job. No, it's really good. I mean, it seems like you were sort of doing that, right?
That's exactly how it felt, because I was thinking like, okay, I'm thinking a little bit about like, DBT interpersonal skills. I'm like, I mean, it almost, and it's interesting when I think about codependent relationships, like it almost didn't even feel worth like declaring like that I needed to be a co-creative or like collaborator. Like I almost didn't even feel like I needed to assert my worth or self-respect, because it felt like in some ways there was something so pitiful and sad, and that, I just wanted to let you know that it was okay. But, within the context of the role play where we're collaborating, I felt like, yes, I'm happy. It's like, I'm happy to pat your head and rub your belly. And, for this to function over time, you can imagine that if this becomes like a persistent theme, there has to be some sort of counterbalance to that. Otherwise, it's a nightmare.
Well, even right now, we could talk about this. I think you're in a very complicated spot, because if this is an interpersonal game, what options are available to you without causing the whole thing to blow up? I think you can be, what you're saying, you found a position of being like the adult with a sort of a temper tantrum child, or a child who has low self-esteem at the moment. And that's one way to go. But the problem with going that way is that buys into, or it helps establish a pattern of relatedness between the two of us that is going to happen again and again and again.
Yes. Well, that's why I didn't do that entirely. And I think that's where I was doing that. But it was a tricky thing. And again, by the end of it, when we listen back, I'm interested to listen back, but by the end of it, I was like, you're amazing. I was noticing I was getting more shrill and more invested in lifting up your energy, getting you to buy into the greatness, because I was kind of like, all right, I'm done with your feeling low. Like, let's get back to work. I wanted to, so I could imagine over time that it's like, I would skip out on all of the parts where I am asserting my own self-respecting independence. And I'm just going right to like affirming you. Yay, Charlie, yay, Charlie, let's
No,
get
you
to work.
were,
You know what I mean?
it was, you might say that the interaction was extinguishing your claims of your own competence, your own contribution.
Yes.
There was a moment when you said, well, and I think I've helped with the production value and this and that. And it was all, of course, true, but I wasn't going to acknowledge any of that in this role play. I mean, I don't want to give you an obvious crumb. I want to give you a crumb when I can afford to give you a crumb. I don't want to give you a
Right. Well, and I noticed, I'm like, I don't want to sit here and give you a list of all the things that I've done and be like, because that felt demeaning. I'm like, what am I going to sit here and prove myself? Like, and say, well, actually I did this and that. Like, I was like, I don't need to justify myself. It was very weird because I'm like, wait a second. Like, am I going to sit here and say, well, what about, like, I'm like, that feels so. I
understand.
Makes me small by participating, but then by not saying anything, I'm kind of agreeing. It's a
now. Do you think you would eventually,
and
if this went on, would there be a time when you would eventually sort of need to have the conversation, like sit down with me and say, Charlie, I've got to talk to you about something that's going on between it. I mean, that would become part of.
Yeah. Well, so it would be. I think it's really a matter of like. If our interactions were like this the majority of the time, it just wouldn't be workable.
Right.
I couldn't, I think it would not be something that I could, it just would be, it wouldn't be worth it. It just wouldn't be, there's no amount of opportunity, cachet, whatever that would make it worth it because, it's exhausting, it's depleting, and it sucks the, whatever kind of collaborative gratification there might be. And I have to believe there wouldn't be much because if every time I'm opening my mouth, you're sighing or rolling your eyes or saying I'm talking too much or that it's about you. I mean, that's not a reciprocal collaborative relationship.
You were already, even in this little role play, working so hard to stay within the lanes that wouldn't offend me too much. I mean, and that's what you have to be on the lookout for. But at the same time, the more you're on the lookout for that, the more you're reinforcing the pattern. So it's really hard to find the middle path. I couldn't do it at that point. You'd have to do something. And you wouldn't want to go too long before you brought stuff up because you don't want to get this pattern to be established for too long with somebody. Hey, there's another observation I made from the inside, you might say, to help me understand something. These different patterns of being narcissistic, so they seem kind of contradictory. There's the pattern of being grandiose and entitled and all of that and all-knowing and it's me. And then there's the pattern of being very uncertain, feeling inferior, feeling envious of other people, and feeling ashamed of yourself. That's just as much part of narcissism, not always in the foreground. But I was thinking, how, when I'm working so hard to have you be my cheerleader and my admirer and my supporter of my great self, how did I get to where I'm telling you about there's other but I kind of envy their podcasts? I mean, I think one reason I could,
but it was disarming.
It was quite a shift. And I think I could only do it because I felt like you had worked so hard to be on board with me that I felt safe enough to say how I actually felt, which is, no, I don't have hundreds of thousands of people listening. Yeah. I barely have, any. Yeah. That's not quite true, but I don't have those numbers and how am I going to get there? And I'm very insecure about it. And I didn't, and I kind of wanted to share that with you because I felt like you were on my team.
Yeah.
And the way you got on my team was to grovel and accept crumbs. And so there's an unholy bargain.
So fascinating. Well, right. And I think that you were it was right around then when I could have been so effing fed up with you and been like, enough. But then you come out with a moment that's genuine and vulnerable. And so then I'm sitting here and I'm like, all right. Now there's something genuine and vulnerable. And I appreciate that, taking the risk to be human and then I can, have compassion for that. But then, and then there's this switch. And I think that that's also part of what makes on the receiving end, what makes it tricky, because I think, again, you're like with this, if you imagine being with a small child that's needy and vulnerable and fragile, it's one thing if they're just having the tantrum, but it's another thing if they stop the tantrum and they say, oh gosh, Mom, or I'm so sorry, or, Aunt Nicole, I'm sorry. I love you. You're great. Thanks so much. Really, my best friend hit me, or what? And then you're like, oh, I understand. Scream and make a mess. And so there was something about that by saying out loud, I'm really ashamed of this, and this is hard for me to say. I think, whatever kind of like irritation and defensive, like this kind of frustration and almost disgust I might have been feeling, it just kind of melts and you're like, okay. And then I'm almost more bought in to like getting it out, like, let's make this
when
better.
I step back and hear you saying this, I realize, you're busy working hard, regulating my self-esteem by your comments and my, I'm making me feel valuable or worthwhile. And I'm busy regulating your irritation with me, or potential irritation, by as soon as I see you getting more irritated and I feel like we're at the edge, now I become vulnerable. And now you can give up your irritation and you can sort of genuinely just be empathic with me or something like that. So you could, I've certainly seen my share of relationships that go back and forth like that. Right.
Totally. And you're always mystified by it. You're like, how do they stay in this? Like, it's so insane. And even this dynamic where it's like the breadcrumbs, I think you watch people where the standards get lower and lower for what they're willing to accept in terms of, because the high highs and low lows, like, after a while when there's so much strife and so much exhaustion, just like one happy moment is so blissful that, it feels like such a victory that someone will say, but but things are better. I think things are better.
Yeah. I wonder how much, and obviously there's overlaps between this kind of dynamic we're talking about now, which we'll sort of call it interpersonal narcissistic dynamic, but with that, and then what happens with domestic violence is that you go a couple steps further than where we were, and I might be becoming more violent, and you're becoming more like accepting of that, but then trying to make up, and it's sort of like going back again and again and again. So I think that narcissism and domestic violence, if you look at the population of people where there's a lot of domestic violence, I think you'd probably find a lot of exactly this kind of process.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And then, again, what you're willing to, for me on this end, like what you're even willing to kind of discount or tolerate. I think at a certain point, obviously, when you're hearing those messages all the time, if I were to stay in a relationship like that, in the beginning where you're like, maybe you're with someone because you see them as wounded and you want to take care of them or whatever. But over time, when you're subjugating yourself and you're listening to demeaning messages, then you start to believe them. And then you stop really remembering that, I got into this in a position thinking I was the caregiver and that the other person was wounded. Then you start to feel wounded.
No,
it's really,
day
really
by
interesting.
day, if you're in this kind of conversation, it can build on itself. You never can go back and erase the previous conversation. You're picking up again, and now you're even accepting even smaller crumbs. And I'm looking for even more adoration. And if I don't get it, I'm going to devalue you even more. And my empathy is going to go down even further. And so, but alongside that, I think that we'll just close with this. Because what we're going to do is each of us is going to get a chance to listen to this now that we've done this. And then next time we can talk about what someone can do about that, or what's a skillful and balanced approach to somebody who's coming across this way. But also, if I have any thoughts, or if you have any thoughts about what is it that the person who has more of the narcissism needs in order to become more effective, whether they get it through a relationship or they get it through a psychotherapy, like how does that change? So I want to say in closing, thanks for doing this, because we both go out on a limb when we do this kind of thing. And I was just thinking, how many people tuned in and just heard this dialogue, and that's all they've heard of us. And they're just thinking, oh my God, is he an asshole? And
like,
she
what?
is sort of, she's, oh my God.
And she is a pushover.
So, anyway, I hope that didn't happen to too many people. And I want to ask at the end of the podcast, and that if people are finding any of this interesting, please go ahead and subscribe wherever you're listening to podcasts, so that you can just get notification of every one that comes out. We try to do one every week, but it'll change sometimes, and then you'll get notified of what the title is and what's coming. And also,
and rate and review wherever you listen to your podcast. It really makes a big difference. It helps other people find.
When you say rate and review, is the review part giving comments? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it helps. It's just, whenever there's engagement, and also lets us know what we're doing right, what we could improve. But it really,
and comments. Those of you who watch this, it's always also on YouTube. So if you want to watch, and you can watch it and there if you wanted, and you can also leave comments there as well, or on my website, charlieswenson.com. They all get archived there, all whatever they are again. I think this is number 91 or 92. Oh my God!
10 billion trillion,
you'll just be one of
million.
Millions of people watching thousands of podcasts. I mean, that's how it's going to be. All right. It's good to see you, Nicole. Have a safe trip back from Norway.
You too. Thank you so much. And thank you all.
Good.
It was